Aaron Davis was the kind of man who prided himself on a hard day's work. Born and raised in Ohio, he had spent the better part of his adult life working as a trucker, living on the road and hauling goods from state to state. Yet, despite the long hours and hard work, Aaron had always dreamed of something more stable future, a family to come home to, and a business he could call his own. In 2017, Aaron's dreams began to take shape when he launched Davis Moving Services in Brooklyn, New York. With just $25,000 of savings and a lot of determination, he built his business from the ground up. The business was modest at first, catering to local families needing help with moves and small businesses in need of reliable, affordable transportation. Yet, Aaron's reputation for hard work, reliability, and financial responsibility soon garnered him a loyal customer base. Davis Moving Services became known for its affordability, punctuality, and Aaron's personal commitment to each job. But what Aaron didn't know at the time was that his new success was about to be overshadowed by a series of secret ones that would spiral out of his control and ultimately lead to a violent, tragic end. Patrice Davis, Aaron's wife, had always seemed the picture of stability and support. The two had met in college, and despite the pressures of Aaron's career as a trucker, they had built a life together in the suburbs of Brooklyn. Their life appeared perfect: a comfortable home, a business on the rise, and a growing sense of security. Patrice worked at Lux Haven Spa in Manhattan, a high-end wellness center catering to wealthy clients. She made a respectable salary of $42,000 a year, plus commissions, and for the most part, contributed to the household with a sense of pride. Yet beneath the surface, the strain of their financial situation was beginning to show. Despite Aaron's growing business, Patrice's spending habits had become increasingly reckless. Patrice had always had a taste for the finer things in life, but in the years following Aaron's entrepreneurial success, she began to spend beyond her means. New clothes, expensive makeup, lavish gifts for herself, and even a few high-end vacations started to strain the couple's finances. Aaron had noticed the discrepancies in their spending, but he was too busy running his business to fully pay attention. The once manageable debts were now piling up, and Patrice's secretive behavior became more and more obvious. But it wasn't just financial strain that was quietly unraveling their marriage. In the winter of 2019, a man named Terrell Mitchell entered Patrice's life, and with him, a dangerous new chapter that would change everything. Terrell was the son of a wealthy real estate mogul, a man whose fortune allowed him to live a lavish lifestyle, one that Patrice found irresistible. He would often visit her at the spa during her shifts, buying her expensive lunches and showering her with gifts. His charm, his wealth, and his carefree attitude were intoxicating to Patrice, who had begun to feel trapped in her marriage. At first, their encounters were innocent enough lunches, casual chats, and harmless flirtation. But before long, Patrice and Terrell's relationship deepened, and it wasn't long before they were seeing each other in secret. Their affair escalated quickly, fueled by the excitement of doing something forbidden. Patrice, already living beyond her means, now found herself indulging in even more expensive tastes, luxury trips, fine dining, and designer items she had only dreamed of owning. Aaron, oblivious to the affair at first, began noticing changes in his wife's behavior. Patrice had become more distant, more defensive. She spent long hours at work, and when at home, seemed preoccupied, distracted. He would often catch glimpses of a phone screen, only to see her quickly hide it when he walked into the room. But what really set off alarms for Aaron were the credit card bills. More often than not, there were charges for items that didn't seem to fit their modest lifestyle, items that Aaron never remembered seeing or approving. Eventually, Aaron's suspicions grew so strong that he began investigating. Late one night, after Patrice had gone to bed, he went through their shared bank account, their credit card statements, and even checked the mail for any bills that might explain their growing debt. What he found shook him to the core. There were receipts for designer clothes, lavish dinners, and hotel stays that he knew had nothing to do with business. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle came together. Patrice had been living a double life. The final blow came one morning, when Erin accidentally stumbled upon an intimate text message between Patrice and Terrell on her phone. It was clear from the exchange that they were deeply involved and that Erin's worst fears had been realized. His wife was having an affair, and the man she had chosen was not just any man, but someone who came from a world of wealth and privilege, something Erin could never offer her. Feeling betrayed and angry, Erin confronted Patrice. The argument was fierce and emotional, with Erin demanding answers. Patrice tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was too overwhelming. She admitted to the affair but begged Erin for forgiveness, telling him that it was a mistake, a temporary lapse that she regretted deeply. Erin, devastated but still in love with his wife, was determined to salvage their marriage. He proposed marriage counseling, financial management courses, and even therapy to address the deeper issues in their relationship. But Patrice, though she seemed regretful, couldn't shake her feelings for Terrell. The affair had become more than just a fling. It had become a source of emotional escape, a way to drown out the mounting pressures of her life and marriage. Terrell, on the other hand, had no intention of letting go. His life was one of excess, of easy money and indulgence. To him, Patrice was just another conquest, a woman he could control with his wealth and charm. When he realized that Erin was still fighting for his marriage, Terrell grew increasingly hostile. He began to see Erin as a threat, a man who was standing in the way of his desires. As Terrell's relationship with Patrice deepened, so did his resentment toward Erin. What began as a flirtation now turned into something darker. Terrell began to threaten Erin, warning him to stay away from Patrice or face the consequences. These threats, veiled behind promises of financial ruin, grew more intense with each passing day. He made it clear to Patrice that she needed to sever all ties with her husband, or else he would make sure Erin paid the price.
But Patrice, torn between the man she had once loved and the man she was now infatuated with, couldn't bring herself to end the marriage. However, the situation was becoming untenable. The financial strain, the threats from Terrell, and her own growing guilt began to weigh on her heavily. In the days following Erin's discovery, Patrice's world began to unravel. But she still hadn't come to terms with the path her life was about to take. Little did she know, Terrell was already making plans to resolve the situation, and not in a way she could ever have imagined. The days that followed Erin's discovery of Patrice's affair were some of the most tumultuous of his life. His heart, still clinging to the hope that his marriage could be salvaged, was torn between anger and disbelief. He spent hours pacing their apartment, trying to make sense of the lies, the betrayal, and the mounting financial chaos. Every corner of their home now seemed tainted by Patrice's secret life, her expensive purchases, the hidden receipts, the whispered conversations on the phone. The man he thought he knew, the woman he thought he loved, were slipping away from him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Erin's confrontation with Patrice had been raw, an emotional explosion of hurt and confusion. He had never expected their marriage to be in this position. After all, they had built a life together. Yet here they were, standing on the precipice of something dark and irreversible. Patrice had begged for forgiveness, crying over the damage she had caused, but her apologies felt hollow to Erin. Deep down, he knew the truth. Patrice wasn't the woman he had married, and she hadn't been for a long time. But Erin wasn't ready to let go. Despite everything, he still loved her, and in some corner of his heart, he believed that their relationship could be repaired. He had always believed in the power of second chances, of fixing what had been broken. He suggested therapy, both marriage counseling and individual sessions for Patrice, hoping it might help her understand the gravity of her actions. Patrice, meanwhile, was conflicted. She had been with Erin for years, and there were moments when she still felt a connection to him, when the memories of their early days together seemed to shine brighter than the affair with Terrell. But these moments were fleeting. In her heart, she knew she had already made a choice. Terrell represented something she could never have with Erin: excitement, luxury, a world far removed from the struggles they had endured. The affair had become more than a brief escape, it had become her escape, her way of coping with everything she felt was missing in her life. Terrell had made it clear that he wasn't interested in sharing her with anyone, not even her husband. He saw Aaron as a weakness, a complication in his plans. And so, the threats began, growing more insistent with each passing day. He would send her messages, sometimes veiled in the language of concern, other times blunt and intimidating. "You need to end this now, or I'll make sure your husband regrets it," one text read, another warning, "I'm not asking you to choose. I'm telling you." Patrice tried to reason with him, reminding him that she still had a life to disentangle. But Terrell was relentless. He promised her that if she left Aaron, he would take care of everything, that he would help her pay off the debts she had accrued, debts that Aaron had been oblivious to until now. But the reality of their financial situation was dire, and Terrell knew it. Her mounting debt, combined with the lifestyle she had become accustomed to, had left her vulnerable. Patrice had reached a breaking point, where her choices seemed to close in on her, and Terrell's offer of an escape seemed like the only way out. While Patrice tried to reconcile the inner turmoil of her life, Terrell was quietly plotting. He had been frustrated by Aaron's attempts to hold on to his marriage, but he was a man who didn't take no for an answer. And he had more than enough resources at his disposal to ensure he would get what he wanted. Terrell's father was a well-known real estate mogul, with vast connections in both legitimate and shadowy circles. He knew how to get things done, and he wasn't afraid to cross lines. It was clear to Terrell that Aaron needed to be removed from the picture, not just emotionally, but permanently. Terrell was accustomed to getting what he wanted, and if Aaron was the obstacle standing in his way, then Terrell wasn't about to let him interfere. He began to scheme. The first step was to get Patrice to fully commit. He made her an offer she couldn't refuse. Once Aaron was out of the way, everything would be hers. The debts, the lifestyle, the future with him. He promised her it would all be taken care of. And in those moments, with her emotions torn between guilt and desire, Patrice allowed herself to believe it. But she wasn't the only one being manipulated. Terrell had already set his plan into motion. Terrell had carefully chosen his accomplices, Marcus Rodriguez and James Cooper, two men who had been involved in shady dealings in the past. Both were hungry for money, and Terrell had promised them a hefty sum in exchange for their services. Marcus was a muscle type, someone who wasn't afraid of getting his hands dirty, while James was a smoother operator, skilled at covering tracks and managing logistics. Together, they made a perfect team. Terrell's plan was simple, but it required precision. He needed to lure Aaron into a trap, a seemingly innocent job that would lead him to an isolated area where his fate would be sealed. The target was a large property in Queens, a place that Aaron had never been before. Terrell used a fake moving job as bait, one that sounded perfectly legitimate, offering Aaron a high-paying contract with a quick turnaround. It was the kind of opportunity Aaron would have never turned down. He was always eager to take on more business to help his growing company. Patrice, too, played her part in the plan. She provided Terrell with everything he needed to know about Aaron's schedule. She knew when he would be available, what his itinerary looked like, and how to get him to trust that everything was above board. She had become a key player in this twisted game, her own personal betrayal now fully intertwined with Terrell's manipulation. She knew she was complicit, but she was too deep in her own web of lies to stop it now. On the morning of the scheduled meeting, Aaron received a call from a man using an unfamiliar voice, confirming the moving job. It was all set, no questions asked. Everything seemed normal. Aaron had no reason to doubt the legitimacy of the offer, and after all, his business needed the work. Patrice kissed him goodbye that morning, telling him she'd see him later. She kept up the facade of a loving wife, while inside, her heart raced with dread. The plan was in motion. As Aaron arrived at the address in Queens, he felt a strange sense of unease. The area was quiet, almost desolate, far from the usual bustle of the city. There was no one in sight, and the street was eerily still. Still, Aaron carried on, telling himself it was just his nerves. What he didn't know was that Terrell, Marcus, and James were already waiting. The morning Aaron Davis arrived at the secluded address in Queens, he had no idea that the normal business transaction he had been anticipating was about to become a matter of life and death. The trucker, always diligent and careful in his business dealings, was about to step into the trap that Terrell Mitchell had meticulously set. For all Aaron knew, it was just another moving job. The type of job he'd taken hundreds of times before. But nothing about this day would be routine. As Aaron stepped out of his truck and surveyed the vacant lot, the uneasy feeling gnawing at him began to grow. The place was eerily quiet. There were no signs of activity, no trucks unloading, no people bustling around as expected. The property was surrounded by high, chain-link fences, its entrance marked by an iron gate that creaked slightly in the cold morning breeze. The silence was deafening. Aaron checked his phone once more. There were no additional messages or updates about the job. But then, just as his suspicions were beginning to take hold, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was Marcus Rodriguez. Marcus had been hired by Terrell to play the role of a fellow moving professional, someone Aaron would recognize and trust. He greeted Aaron with a friendly handshake, his presence seemingly reassuring. He wore a blue jumpsuit, as if to blend in with the nature of the job, and he carried a clipboard, detailing the specifics of the move. "Hey man, you must be Aaron," Marcus said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're just getting everything set up. The guys are inside prepping, but I can give you the rundown." Aaron nodded, still wary but trying to remain professional. "How big is the job?" he asked, trying to sound confident, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I'm not seeing anyone else here." "Yeah, it's a little quiet," Marcus replied with a half-hearted chuckle. "It's a smaller job than usual. Shouldn't take more than a couple of hours. We're just moving some stuff into storage." He waved his hand vaguely toward the warehouse in the distance. "You'll be in and out." Aaron glanced toward the building, trying to gauge the situation. Something still didn't sit right with him, but he pushed the doubt aside. It wasn't unusual to deal with smaller moves in quiet locations. This was business, after all. But even as he followed Marcus toward the warehouse, his instincts continued to prickle at the back of his mind. Inside the warehouse, everything seemed to be prepared for the job. There were no signs of urgency or chaos, just empty boxes stacked neatly and some office furniture waiting to be loaded. Marcus led Aaron toward the back of the building, where two men were already standing by a set of large wooden crates. "These are the pieces that need to be moved first," Marcus explained as they walked toward the crates. "Should be easy work." As Aaron neared, he noticed the two men standing by the crates. One of them was James Cooper, the second accomplice, who had been hired to cover up the evidence after the job was done. James was standing next to a dolly, pretending to check the contents of the crate, his posture stiff and his eyes darting nervously between Aaron and Marcus. "Everything okay in here?" Aaron asked, his tone cautious but polite. James quickly looked up and offered a strained smile. "Yeah, just getting everything ready. Shouldn't take long." Aaron wasn't convinced. Something about James felt off, like he was being watched. But before he could react, Marcus stepped in front of him, blocking his view of James for a moment. "Let's get started, Aaron," Marcus said, his voice too casual. "The quicker we finish, the better." Reluctantly, Aaron agreed. He had no reason to believe anything was amiss yet, and he couldn't afford to lose business. But as the minutes ticked by, his discomfort only grew. There was something about the way the men moved, the way they avoided his gaze, that set his nerves on edge. He could feel his body tightening with unease. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension, and for the first time in a long while, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Outside, Patrice was sitting in her car, parked a few blocks away, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She couldn't bring herself to leave the car, unable to watch the unfolding events at the warehouse. Her mind was in a state of turmoil, guilt, fear, and the overwhelming sense of inevitability. She had known all along that this was coming. She had known that Terrell wouldn't stop until Aaron was out of the picture. And while a part of her had tried to hold on to some semblance of her old life with Aaron, the darker side of her knew that she was already too far gone. The affair had already consumed her, and now, this murder, this terrible, irreversible decision, was the final step in her own escape from the life she had with Aaron. Patrice had been a willing participant, providing Terrell with everything he needed to set his plan into motion. She had handed over Aaron's schedule, told Terrell when he would be most vulnerable. She had known that once this was done, there would be no turning back. She would be free of Aaron, free of the debts that had weighed heavily on her, and free to live a life with Terrell, surrounded by wealth and luxury. But as she sat in her car, staring at the warehouse, Patrice felt a pang of remorse. She had loved Aaron once, truly. They had shared dreams, shared moments of joy, of love. But she had lost herself along the way, had let the temptation of Terrell's world lure her away from the life she had built. Now, with Aaron's life hanging in the balance, Patrice didn't know if she could forgive herself. She was an accomplice in a murder. And no matter how she tried to rationalize it, there would be no coming back from that. Back in the warehouse, Aaron was beginning to realize that he had been lured into a trap. As Marcus and James led him deeper into the building, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were no moving materials, no packing supplies. Just cold, hard concrete floors and empty crates. Before he could react, Marcus turned to him suddenly. "Aaron, I'm sorry, but you need to understand," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's nothing personal. Terrell doesn't want you to get in the way anymore." Aaron's heart dropped. It was happening. In that moment, he understood. There was no moving job. There was no business. It was all a lie. He was being set up, and there was no escape. In an instant, Marcus pulled a gun from his belt, and Aaron was thrust to the ground. His mind raced as his body reacted instinctively, trying to fight back, to struggle free. But Marcus was too strong, and James quickly joined in, holding Aaron down as the barrel of the gun pressed into his chest. "Goodbye, Aaron," Marcus whispered, just before he fired. The world went black for Aaron as he fell into unconsciousness, the last thing he felt being the cold steel against his skin and the sharp pain in his chest. The moment Aaron fell to the floor, the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Time slowed, the faint echo of the gunshot ringing in his ears as his vision blurred. The pain in his chest spread like wildfire, consuming his body, his thoughts, his world. But it wasn't enough to stop him. As he fought for air, as darkness closed in on him, he felt one final jolt of terror. He wasn't going to make it. The two men loomed over him like shadows, their faces unreadable. Marcus stood with the gun still in his hand, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. James looked down at Aaron's motionless body, his expression tense, as if he couldn't fully comprehend what he had just been part of. Marcus had made sure the job was done, but the coldness of it unsettled him. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about eliminating a man. Taking a life. And no amount of money could make that right. "Is he?" James asked, his voice faltering, as he nudged Aaron's body with his foot. Yeah, Marcus replied with an air of finality, holstering his gun. He's done. Let's get this cleaned up and get out of here. As Marcus and James set to work cleaning the scene, removing any traces of blood or evidence, they moved with the cold professionalism of people accustomed to violence. The warehouse, once sterile and empty, now seemed to be a graveyard, silent and foreboding. They wiped down every surface, using industrial-grade supplies to erase any fingerprints or fibers that could trace back to them. They were meticulous, almost mechanical in their efforts. The crime had been planned to the smallest detail, and they knew that any slip-up could lead to their downfall. But as they worked, neither man spoke much. There was no need for words. The weight of what they had just done hung heavy between them. Their actions had been guided by a plan, but now that it was finished, the reality of it felt like a suffocating presence. By the time they finished cleaning the scene, the sun had begun to set. It was late afternoon, and the streets outside the warehouse had quieted. They dragged Aaron's body into a corner, out of view, before making sure the truck was parked in the right place. The next step was to stage a robbery, a move that would confuse investigators and lead them down the wrong path. Marcus knew exactly how to pull it off. He had dealt with these kinds of things before. He took Aaron's wallet, emptied it of all its contents, and placed it on the floor near the door. It was the final touch to make the scene look like a botched robbery. With that done, the two men left the warehouse, locking the door behind them and heading toward their getaway car. Meanwhile, Patrice was sitting in her car a few blocks away, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing that once Aaron was dead, her life would change forever. But even now, as she sat in the car, her chest tight with dread, she couldn't bring herself to feel any relief. Her heart was heavy, and her thoughts were a tangled mess of guilt, regret, and fear. She had seen Aaron leave that morning, expecting him to return later that day with the job completed. But now, with each passing hour, Patrice's anxiety deepened. She couldn't stay in the car forever. She had to know if it was done. She had to know if she was finally free. Patrice texted Terrell, asking for an update. Her hands trembled as she waited for his reply. Within moments, her phone buzzed. The message was brief. "It's done." Patrice let out a shaky breath, a mixture of fear and relief flooding her system. She quickly typed back, asking if everything had been taken care of. Terrell's reply was curt. "Everything's fine. It's over."